My name is Evan, and I'm the youngest of three siblings. I have two older sisters, both of whom moved out years ago, so for most of my teenage life it was just me and my parents living in our house. Our house sat in a quiet neighborhood outside a medium-sized town. It wasn't rural exactly, but it also wasn't crowded. Most houses had large yards, and behind our backyard there was a stretch of woods that went on for at least half a mile before reaching the next street. When I was growing up, those woods were just kind of always there in the background of our lives. We didn't really think about them. My dad would mow the lawn up to the tree line, and past that it was just dense trees, brush, and uneven ground. When I was around 15, I started getting into running. Not seriously, just something I did in the evenings to clear my head after school. Eventually, I got bored of running around the neighborhood streets, so one day I decided to explore the woods behind our house. There wasn't really a trail at first, but after walking for a while, I found what looked like an old path. It was narrow and partly covered with leaves, but it was clear enough that someone had walked through there many times before. I started using that path regularly. Every couple days, I'd go for a short run through the woods, usually around sunset. It became part of my routine, and for a while, nothing unusual ever happened, until one afternoon toward the end of summer. I remember it clearly because it had rained earlier that day, so the ground was still damp and the air smelled like wet leaves. I was maybe 10 minutes into my run when I noticed something ahead on the trail. At first I thought it was just trash, but as I got closer I realized it was a folding lawn chair sitting right in the middle of the path. That alone was strange. Nobody ever hung out back there. There weren't any houses or campsites nearby, just woods. The chair looked old and faded, the kind people use for camping. I slowed down and looked around. The woods were completely quiet. No voices, no movement, just the sound of leaves shifting slightly in the wind. I stepped around the chair and kept running, but the whole time I had this weird feeling in my chest like someone had been sitting there watching the trail, waiting. When I got home, I mentioned the chair to my dad. He assumed it probably belonged to a hunter scouting the area early for deer season. That explanation made sense, so I didn't think about it much after that. But the next time I ran through the woods a few days later, the chair was gone. In its place was something even stranger, a small plastic cooler sitting on the ground beside the path. It looked brand new, bright red, completely clean. I slowed down again and looked around. The woods were silent. I remember standing there for maybe 20 seconds just listening. Something about the cooler being there felt wrong, like it had been placed there intentionally. Eventually, I kept running and tried to forget about it. But after that day, I started noticing little things. Sometimes I'd hear movement deeper in the trees when I passed certain areas. Branches snapping, leaves crunching. Whenever I stopped running and looked toward the sound, it would immediately stop. The woods would go silent again. At first I assumed it was just animals, but the noises always seemed too heavy to be small animals, more like footsteps. One evening about a week later, something happened that really bothered me. I was running the same path as usual when I noticed the cooler was open now. The lid was flipped back, and inside it looked completely empty. Except for one thing. There was a bottle of water sitting inside. The label had been peeled off, which I thought was weird. Most people wouldn't bother doing that. I stood there staring at it for a moment. Then I looked around again. That's when I had the strongest feeling yet that someone was nearby, watching. I don't know why, but suddenly the woods felt much quieter than normal, like everything had stopped moving. I decided to turn around and head home. And as I started jogging back the way I came, I heard something behind me. Footsteps, slow ones. They only lasted a couple seconds before stopping again, but they sounded way too close to just be an animal. I didn't turn around. I just kept running until I reached the edge of my backyard. When I got inside, I told my dad what happened. He walked out with a flashlight and checked the woods near our property, but he didn't find anyone. After that, my parents told me to stop running in the woods alone, which I did for a while. But after a couple months, I kind of forgot about the whole thing, until something happened that winter. One night around 11 p.m., I was sitting in my room playing video games. My bedroom window faced the backyard. The blinds were partially open so I could see outside. At one point, I looked up from my screen and noticed something strange near the tree line. There was a light. Not bright like a flashlight, more like a dim yellow glow. It looked almost like someone holding a lantern. The light moved slowly between the trees for a few seconds, then disappeared. I stared at the woods for another minute, but it didn't come back. At that point, I started feeling uneasy again. It reminded me too much of the strange things I had noticed months earlier. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. But about 20 minutes later, I heard something outside, a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it might be branches hitting the window from the wind, but then it happened again. 3 slow taps, right against the glass. My stomach immediately dropped. My room was on the second floor of the house. There was absolutely no reason anyone should be able to reach that window from outside. I slowly stood up and walked toward the window. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my chest. When I pulled the blinds open slightly, I didn't see anyone, just darkness. The backyard looked completely empty. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ladder from our garage was leaning against the side of the house, right below my window. Someone had moved it there. And suddenly the tapping sound made sense. I ran out of my room and woke my parents up immediately. My dad grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check, but whoever had been there was already gone. The ladder was still leaning against the wall exactly where I saw it, and there were muddy footprints in the grass leading toward the woods. My parents called the police. They searched the area for a while but never found anyone. After that night, my dad installed motion lights around the backyard. For a few months, everything seemed normal again, until the night we got the security camera alert. It was around 2 a.m. when my dad's phone went off. The motion camera near the tree line had detected movement. We all woke up when his phone alarm started going off repeatedly. He opened the camera feed, and what we saw made the entire situation 10 times worse. There was a man standing right at the edge of the woods, looking directly at our house. He wasn't moving, just standing there completely still. The camera captured him for about 10 seconds before the motion recording ended. The next clip started about 30 seconds later, and this time he was closer, standing halfway across the backyard, still looking toward the house. Then the third clip started, and he was standing directly under my bedroom window, looking up. The footage ended there. The police came again that night, but like before, they never found anyone. We ended up installing more cameras and brighter lights around the house after that. Thankfully, we never saw the man again, but even now, years later, I still think about the fact that someone was apparently watching me long enough to know which room was mine, and I still wonder how long he had been out there in those woods before we ever realized he was there.